Shalom and welcome to Temple Talk. This is Yitzchak Reuven here in Jerusalem, Israel. Rabbi Richman on his way home right now as we speak. Home to the Promised Land, home to Eretz Israel, the land of Israel, from Texas, where he spoke twice this past week. Very successful speaking engagements. The second one being on Sunday, which was Yom Yerushalayim, Jerusalem Day here in Israel, marking the 51st anniversary of the liberation and reunification of the holy city of Jerusalem during the 1967 Six-Day War. Today is Rosh Chodesh, new moon, the new month of Sivan. Today is the first day of Sivan, 5778. It is the 15th of May, 2018, and so much has happened in the past 2 weeks since we last broadcast. It's hard to conceive that so much could happen in so short a time. I believe that in that time, Israel, let's start from the beginning. President Trump canceled, killed, crushed the agreement that the United States had signed with other nations, with Iran, the nuclear agreement. Trump pulled out of it. The United States pulled out of it. And I understand that the United States will be enacting sanctions against Iran. And right after that, the timeline is so amazing. Right after that, Israel, or right before that, I forget now, Israel attacked, took out some positions in Iran. Iran was already planning to get vengeance on Israel for earlier attacks by Israel in Syria on Iranian installations in Syria. Of course, Syria is not Iran, but Iran is taking over Syria, trying to. And Iran is very anxious to strike back at Israel for that, and also for exposing the great nuclear documents heist that Israel pulled off. And then Israel, Prime Minister Netanyahu went to Russia and met with Putin on the most important day of the Russian calendar, which is the day in which they celebrate and commemorate the millions who died in World War II. And Netanyahu was given a royal treatment, a real honored treatment in Russia. And he came back to Israel, and that evening Israel went on a massive attack in Syria, striking many Iranian positions, killing a number of Iranians in the meantime, and apparently basically destroying the entire very painstakingly built up infrastructure, military infrastructure that Iran's been working on in Syria for the past few years. A major setback for Syria, who is more determined than ever to strike back, but I guess is biding its time because its possibilities are limited. Iran spread very thin, and now with the United States pulling out of the nuclear agreements, it's going to be a big blow to their economy, which is already reeling and suffering. And even though you don't read about it or see it on the news much anymore, the protests which began in Iran against the regime some months ago are continuing, and they're very widespread, and they don't seem to be going away anytime soon. And so they're in a little bit of a pickle. In the meantime, this week, moving right along, just yesterday, the United States officially opened its new embassy in Jerusalem. Just as President Trump promised, he delivered. He promised the embassy, he delivered. He promised that he would put an end to what he called the worst deal in history, and he did that too. So Israel is very, very pleased with both these decisions. And yesterday was an especially festive day in Jerusalem. You might have seen some of the ceremony on the news. President Trump wasn't here, but his daughter Ivanka and her husband Jared were here. And Um, it was a good time had by all, following the day before, which was Jerusalem Day, which is always such a wonderful, amazing day in Israel, in Jerusalem, where people are just out in the streets, happy together, dancing, singing, waving flags. And of course, the big news, which we've been reporting on Facebook, is that a record number of Jews went up to the Temple Mount on Jerusalem Day. 2,084 went up to the Mount. Not a one was left behind. Not a one was left waiting. Police were very accommodating, despite the fact that the scuffle broke out in the morning because there was a strong presence also of Muslims on the Mount, and they began a provocation in the morning, which was responded to by singing, by very happy, festive singing by the Jews on the Mount, which of course is forbidden according to the status quo, which still does not allow for any vocal expression of any kind of Jewish identity or Jewish prayer on the Temple Mount. A couple of other incidents where a number of young Jews simultaneously prostrated themselves on the Mount Hishtachaviyah, which is actually a positive commandment to do on the Temple Mount, but again, part of the status quo. You're not allowed to have any expression of religiosity on the Mount unless you're a Muslim. And so they were removed, and another group was able to smuggle up an Israeli flag and open it up for a few brief seconds before the police took it down. But all in all, it was a very beautiful experience on the Mount. I went up in the afternoon, during which another 500 people went up, and it was very beautiful. And of course, all the local evening news carried the story, and which just puts it more in the national dialogue. And you know what? It's no longer a bunch of crazies in the perception of the general public. It's no longer just a few. It's widespread. Everybody's going up, all different kinds of people. Everybody goes up, they come back, they tell other people, because it's a great experience, because the police, we really have to give credit and give thanks where it's due. The police have done a complete about-face over the past 2 years under the leadership of the Minister of Police, Minister of Internal Security, Gilad Erdan, and they are very accommodating, very gracious, very friendly. And I encourage everybody to go up, because it's just a wonderful, pleasant experience. And the more people go up, the more this status quo, which even the speakers for the United States in the dedication of the new embassy yesterday in Jerusalem mentioned more than once the importance of the United States' eyes of keeping the status quo in the Temple Mount. You know what? The status quo and the Temple Mount is fine as long as it's moving and changing in our direction, because no status quo ever stays the same. There's nothing static about a status quo, especially here in Israel, where everything's always changing. And in this case, at this moment, the status quo is slowly moving in our direction, toward our favor, in our favor. And we still can't pray out loud. We still can't pray as a minyan, as a group of 10 people. We still can't sing. We still can't do those things, but we certainly can pray silently, and we certainly can speak openly, quoting from our holy sources, etc., etc. It's a ever-changing and ever-brightening situation on the Temple Mount. As you may also have been reading or seeing on the news, these horrible peaceful demonstrations, as they call them, in Gaza, not actually in Gaza, on the border between Gaza and the state of Israel, which on the one side is Gaza, on the other side are Israeli towns and kibbutzim and agricultural fields, which are going up in flames because the Palestinians have been sending burning kites over the border that land in the fields, and hundreds of thousands of dollars of crops have been destroyed. And the plan of the Hamas in Gaza was to intensify these very violent, nonviolent protests, as they call them, which involve the burning of hundreds, if not thousands, of tires each day, which just creates a horrible, horrible, deadly, thick black smoke, which creates a smoke screen under which Hamas terrorists try to cut through the fence, the border fence, and get into Israel. And of course, should any of these terrorists actually enter into Israel, then it puts our people in mortal danger. So the IDF, the Israeli army, has announced well in advance that any attempts will be met with live fire. And yesterday, 59 Palestinians were killed. 50,000 or more arrived. With the encouragement, with the orders of Hamas, families were given $100 to go there for the day. And the people who were killed were people who were trying to either break through the fence or approach the fence, which the IDF warned them was also cause for live fire, or Palestinians who actually opened fire on Israeli forces or tried to attack by other means. Very deadly day, and of course I know that in CNN and some other news outlets in the world, they were doing a split screen coverage of the very, very happy and celebratory inauguration of the embassy, and the other half of the screen were these horrible riots and deadly attempt to break into our country in Gaza. And of course, there is an agenda and a story being told by doing a split screen like that. But be that as it may, those people in Gaza who are being killed are doing the bidding of Hamas, and the only people whose deaths, whose interests those deaths serve is the Hamas, who is being funded by Iran, and especially this particular mission, which has been going on for weeks now, of approaching the border each day and violently trying to get through. And they're supposed to end today, which is Nakba Day. I'll get to that in a moment. Now they're saying they'll extend them for another month. I don't know. It seems also that Hamas may be trying to tone it down a bit, because next, I think, would be a targeted assassination of their leaders if they don't step back a bit here. Anyway, as I just mentioned, Nakba Day, that's the Palestinian term for the establishment of Israel. It's their disaster day, and so it's a concept that they came up with a few years ago, another day in the yearly calendar that they can have a day of rage and be violent and try to kill or be killed. That seems to be the game. It's also, I think it's tonight, tomorrow, is the beginning of the Muslim month of Ramadan, which is, of course, a holy month for them, a month of fasting. And in recent years, it has also been a month of intensified violence and incitement. So we have that to prepare for. Of course, it means a much greater Muslim presence on the Temple Mount. In fact, during the month of Ramadan, the afternoon hour that Jews and other non-Muslims can go up to the Mount is canceled. The morning hours are from 7:30 to 11, as usual. That will continue throughout the month. But because of the much higher number of Muslims on the Mount during the month, the afternoon hour is canceled for the month. Okay, we've talked all about this, and we haven't even mentioned yet that this Shabbat is Parashat Bamidbar, which is the very first parsha of the book of Numbers, which in Hebrew is Bamidbar, which literally means in the desert, which is actually a much more accurate title for this book because it is all about the adventures and misadventures of Israel in the desert, basically beginning with the very beginning of the second year in the desert, after the establishment of the tabernacle, all the way through the final 40th year in the desert, when Israel is going to enter into the land. And of course, at this point in our story, the nation of Israel is getting ready imminently to enter the land of Israel because, well, let's see, they received the Torah at Mount Sinai. They got instructions and built the Mishkan, the desert tabernacle, and the Kohanim, the priests, were trained and have begun the avodah, the service in the tabernacle. So right now, all that's left before entering the land is what is taking place here in Parashat Bamidbar, which is the formation of an army to lead the invasion and conquest of the land. And of course, what they don't know yet, but what we know, because we've been reading the spoiler now for our entire lives, is that in upcoming weeks in our reading, we will read about the debacle, about the disaster of the spies, which will forestall Israel's entrance into the land for another 39 years. But right now, that hasn't happened yet, and everything is progressing very beautifully in the desert. And like I said, Israel is getting ready to enter. And I find it very interesting that it's only at this point, a year on in their journey from Egypt to Israel, only at this point that God commands Israel to form an army. I would think that the first thing that the nation would do after leaving Egypt would be to form an army, some kind of self-defense. They're not alone in the desert, and in fact, they were attacked right after crossing the Sea of Reeds. They were attacked by Amalek, and they had to quickly put up a defense, which was led by Joshua, and Moses, and they were able to defeat Amalek. But rather than use that as an impetus to go on and form an army, they had other things. God had other things in mind for them. God had other plans, and those plans were first getting to Mount Sinai and receiving the Torah, and right after that, building the Mishkan, the tabernacle. And right after it was completed, then of course God's presence entered into the tabernacle. So God is building this nation from the inside out, literally, as opposed from the outside in, because the army is your perimeter. That's your defense. It's like today, they guard the borders. But God did it differently. He first, to tell you the truth, he first made the soul and then made the body, the opposite of creation of man, really, where God took a lump of clay and breathed life into it. Here, God is telling Israel first, build this tabernacle. I will put my presence in it. That will be your life force. That will be your heartbeat. That will be your pulse. And then, once that's done, then you will build a defensive perimeter around this living heart of the nation. So, first of all, this took a tremendous amount of faith and trust by the people that they could put their entire focus on creating this dwelling place for God's presence, and not worrying at the same time about their own defense. And of course, during this time, Israel ran into no no enemies, no hostile neighbors. And I think there's a lesson to be learned in that as well. When we are focused on bringing God's presence into this world, which is really what the building of the Mishkan was all about, then God is focused even more so on making sure that no one will harm us. But once that was done, and the avodah and the service in the tabernacle was begun, now God has instructed Israel to take a census to count its people, which is why the book in English is called Numbers, because it begins with a census that Moshe was instructed by God to conduct. And that census was done for the purpose of making an army. And with the making of the army, the 12 tribes are each given a particular place, and that they are to encamp around the tabernacle. And 12 tribes form an outer perimeter around the encampment, and then between them and the tabernacle itself is the tribe of Levi, who are the Levites, and the Kohanim, the priests, who form an inner perimeter in their encampment around the tabernacle. And they are not part of the army. Their job is to conduct the service in the tabernacle, and also to transport the tabernacle through the desert, to take it apart, to cover up all the vessels, and to carefully carry them through to the next point of encampment, at which point they will take them out again and re-erect the tabernacle. And of course, there's 12 tribes in the perimeter, because Joseph has his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, each a separate tribe, each forming a separate encampment. Here's the music, so don't go away. I'll be right back. Temple Talk. Shalom and welcome back to Temple Talk. Yitzchak Reuven here again. Today is the first day of the new month of Sivan, the third month in the Hebrew calendar. In the year is 5778. It's May 15th, 2018. This week's Shabbat, we read Parashat Bamidbar. We've been talking about that. It's the first Parashat in the book of Numbers. And we've been talking about all the events of the past 2 weeks, which have been filled with action, excitement, some dreams come true for the people of Israel. One of those dreams, I have to say, is the opening of the United States Embassy in Israel, which is a tremendous, tremendous gift. As all the U.S. officials stated very clearly in their speeches yesterday at the embassy opening, it is the recognition of the truth that Jerusalem not only has been the capital of Israel for the past 70 years, it's been the capital of Israel for 3,000 years, and it's been the capital of no other nation ever during those 3,000 years. And well, it's sometimes recognition of the truth, even if it comes 70 years late, is still a gift, and it's still something that we cherish. And of course, Congress enacted a bill in 1995 calling on the president to move the embassy to Jerusalem, and it I guess that means it was during the time of Clinton and then Bush and then Obama. And it was only President Trump who, I've got to say, had the courage, the conviction, and the integrity to go through with this. I know cynics are saying, ooh, it's going to cause problems. And look at Gaza. Look what's going on in Gaza right now. What's going on in Gaza right now actually was planned to coincide with Israel's 70th birthday and Jerusalem Day and all that. And the embassy was only an afterthought. But they need very little excuse to send their own people to their deaths, unfortunately. And it really has nothing to do with the embassy. And in fact, the general response when it was announced in December that the United States would be moving the embassy to Jerusalem was pretty muted across the Arab world, with the exception of the Palestinians, who are finding themselves to be more and more isolated as things progress. Anyway, today, first day of the month of Sivan. Sivan is the third month in the Hebrew calendar, and in fact, it makes an appearance in the book of Exodus, in the Parashat Yitro. It's chapter 19, the first verse. It's not called by the name of Sivan, because the name Sivan was only given to the month later, after the Babylonian exile. But it says, and I read from now, Exodus 19:1, in the third month from the exodus of the children of Egypt, I'm going to start again. In the third month from the exodus of the children of Israel from Egypt, on this day they arrived at the wilderness of Sinai. They journeyed from Rephidim and arrived at the wilderness of Sinai and encamped in the wilderness, and Israel encamped there opposite the mountain. That mountain, of course, was Mount Sinai, and Israel is now in place for receiving the Torah, which is actually what we're going to be celebrating next Sunday, because next Sunday, Saturday night Sunday, is the holiday of Shavuot. Yes, I neglected to mention earlier that today is the 45th day of the counting of the Omer. And of course, we count the Omer for 7 complete weeks, which means 49 days. And the final day of the counting this year will be on Shabbat, which means that Motzei Shabbat, which is the evening at the conclusion of Shabbat, will begin the 50th day from the beginning of the counting of the Omer. And the 50th day is the holiday of Shavuot. If you recall, we began counting the Omer and the day immediately following the first day of Passover. And so Shavuot actually begins on the 51st day after the first day of Passover. And it is the holiday of the festival of receiving the Torah at Mount Sinai. So, as we just read from the book of Exodus, Israel arrived at Sinai at the beginning of the month and set down their encampment. And it says that B'chodesh HaShlishi, the third month, and then it goes on to say, in the second verse, it says, Vayis'u mirafidim vayavo midbar Sinai vayachanu Bamidbar. And they, Israel, traveled from Rephidim, and they came to the desert of Sinai, and they encamped in the desert. And then it continues, the same verse, and says, Vayichan sham Yisrael neged ahar. And Vayichan, as opposed to what I read earlier, Vayachanu, is in the singular. This is a nation. This is hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people. So Vayachanu, that's a plural. They encamped. But now all of a sudden it's as if it said he encamped. Israel encamped, singular, facing the mountain. So this is unusual grammatical construct here. So our sages teach us that Vayichon Sham, and they encamped there as one, united, as one people, one heart, mulahar, one heart facing Mount Sinai. And it was in that unified stance that we were able to receive Torah, because a divided nation cannot receive Torah. And in fact, soon after, when Moshe explains to the people what is going to happen, that God is going to speak to them from Sinai, the entire people, I'm reading now in chapter 19, verse 7, the entire people responded together and said, everything that Hashem has spoken, we shall do. So unity is it's always the commandment of the day. And that unity is what brought Israel to Sinai and what opened Israel's hearts and ears to hear and internalize the Torah. And it's only unity that carries us forward in our mission on this planet. And disunity is always the greatest danger for the people of Israel. And again, we just celebrated a Jerusalem Day. And one of the themes of Jerusalem Day is the unity of the nation. And it's something that's etched very much into the fiber of our being, into our DNA, into our consciousness. And it's not a given, but it's something that we always need to strive for and to live up to and to appreciate, even as we are living it. Unity, that's where the strength of the nation comes from. You know, every one of the three regalim, the three chagim, both of those words mean pilgrimage. The three holidays, three pilgrimages from the Torah, which are Sukkot and Passover, Pesach, and Shavuot, all three have a twin aspect to them. They have the aspect of a historical aspect, an aspect embracing the history of Israel, that is Israel through time, and also an agricultural aspect which embraces the land of Israel, which is Israel in place, in space. I always like to stress that God created creation by first creating time and space. Which one he created first? That's not for discussion right now, but it makes for a fascinating discussion. But God created our world by first invoking time and space. And each of our holidays also invokes time and space and embraces time and space and brings out the sanctity, the holiness in time and space. And of course, the time-oriented aspect of the holiday of Shavuot is receiving of Torah, which we've been talking about, which we received on this day, 50 days after leaving Egypt. The agricultural aspect is the bringing of the bikurim, the first fruits. And this is a very, very, very beautiful, beautiful aspect, because the first fruits are the first fruits of the season. And they are the fruits that we grow and mark off when they first appear on our trees and our fields and our orchards. We mark off with ribbons which one are the first, so that these are the fruits that we bring. And we bring the first fruits to God. And we thank God. And of course, there's a beautiful prayer that we recite when we bring these fruits to the altar and stand before the Kohen, the priest, in which we basically give a quick synopsis of the history of Israel from our wandering, beginning with our forefathers, Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and throughout the history into Egypt and out of Egypt. And here, we've entered the land of Israel, we've settled in the land, we've tilled the soil, we have crops, And the first thing we're going to do is bring our first fruits to God, to thank God for all the blessing of our land and all the blessing that He has given us. For God promised and God delivered. You've heard that a lot lately in different contexts. God promised and God delivered, and we thank God every day. But on Shavuot, we bring our first fruits. It's actually the beginning of the season for bringing first fruits. We have throughout the entire summer, up through Sukkot, and even after, to bring our first fruits as they ripen to the Holy Temple. But the season for that begins on Shavuot, and it's a very, very, very beautiful gesture. You've probably heard me say this before, but I always relate it to the Garden of Eden. You know, God created man in the Garden of Eden, and He said to man, just look after it. Take care of yourself and look after the garden. And of course, man did what he did. He struck out. He wanted to be independent. God bless him. So God said, you can't be independent. But to be independent, you have to leave the Garden of Eden, which man did, entered into history. And here we are now. We enter into the land of Israel, which, you know what, is our Garden of Eden. God has reconstructed, He has reimagined, He has reformulated the Garden of Eden. And now it's the land of Israel. And it's for all of us. And now that we enter, what's the first thing we do? Well, you know, we know about doing tshuva, right? We know about atoning, about making amends. And we know that it's one thing to say you're sorry, but to really do tshuva, you need to find yourself or put yourself in that same situation where you erred to begin with and went astray to begin with, and this time fix it. And so you know what? We're back in the Garden of Eden. We're in the land of Israel. It's our Garden of Eden. So this time, instead of taking that first fruit, taking that fruit that God said, it's not yours, don't touch it. You can touch anything else. You can eat from any other tree in the garden, but not from this. So what do? What's the gesture? We take our first fruits and we bring them to God, and we say, thank you, God. And we make amends. And we're back on the inside. We're back in our Garden of Eden, the land of Israel. It doesn't get any more beautiful than that. And that is Shavuot. That is the beauty of Shavuot. Marks the day that we received Torah, we received our purpose, we received our CV, we received who we are, our DNA, our identity as a people, and it is on this day that we also make amends, and on this day that we embrace all the bounty and all the beauty that God has blessed us with, and thank God. And it's a one-day holiday. Now, it's unique in that aspect because, of course, Passover and the Sukkot are 7-day holidays. And actually, Shavuot is also referred to as Atzeret, which means like a tagged-on day, an end day, just like Shmini Atzeret is the 8th day following Sukkot. Following the 7 days of Sukkot, there's an 8th day, which is called Shmini Atzeret, the 8th additional day, literally, the translation, and also known today as Simchat Torah, because it's a day that we celebrate the cycle of reading the Torah each year. And also Shavuot is referred to as an Atzeret. It's an Atzeret, it's an additional day to Passover, believe it or not, which is not following the 7th day of Passover, but it's following the cycle of 7 weeks after the first day of Passover. So it stays within that same mathematical construct, but it's 50 days following the first day of Passover. And so it's a one-day holiday. In fact, however, because it's not easy for everybody to get to the Holy Temple in a single day, and people are traveling, and especially in the olden days, travel was a little bit slower than it is today. The Holy Temple and the Kohanim were actually open and available to receive your bikurim, your first fruits, in the status of giving them on Shavuot for an entire week, even though the holiday itself was just one single day. So to this day, it's the entire week following the day of Shavuot is it's not a holiday, but it has maintains aspects of the festival days in our prayer and in our daily obligations. It maintains some aspect of the holiday itself. So this is the holiday of Shavuot, coming up, like I said, on Motzei Shabbat, Saturday night, Sunday. Of course, it is the custom for many people to stay up the entire night and study. There are certain seder, a certain order of things that we study, or we can study on our own. And the idea is to not sleep at all on the day that we're receiving Torah, but to actually imbibe all night long on the Torah and to study it. So groups form in synagogues and at houses, and the programs are laid out, and there's learning all night long and early morning with the first beams of light in the morning. It's usually around 4:30 in the morning. People who have stayed up all night return to the synagogue and begin the morning service. It's very, very beautiful custom. And in fact, it is also related to a midrash, an understanding that, amazingly enough, after all this preparation that Israel did to receive Torah, the final days before receiving Torah, they had lots of things to prepare. According to midrash, according to our tradition, the people overslept that morning. I guess they were so busy preparing that they forgot to set their alarm clocks. They overslept, and they almost missed the whole thing. So in order to never have that happen again, we make sure that we stay up all night so we can't possibly miss receiving Torah in the morning, because, as we all know, not only were we all there at Mount Sinai all those many years ago when we first received Torah, all our souls were there because of the Israelites who were there in body, their souls and our souls. We were all there. We're all there. We all received it. And in fact, anybody who is not of Israel but converts and joins the people of Israel, they also were there. Their soul was also there, which is why they have the yearning today to join the nation. So not only were we all there then, but every year on Shavuot, we have the opportunity to receive Torah again. And it's an opportunity that we need to avail ourselves of and take advantage of and be present for throughout the entire day of receiving Torah, which is, again, why many people stay up throughout the entire night and study, and then in the morning pray, and after our morning service, morning prayers, then we can go to sleep for a few hours before we wake up for lunch. That's always a nice morning for me, because it's the one morning during the year where, after I've stayed up all night, I can actually sleep late. Don't have to worry about getting up to pray, because I already did. Just have to worry about getting up to have lunch, which is also part of the celebration. Shavuot. What can I say more about Shavuot? Absolutely beautiful holiday, and the rabbi and Mrs. Richman will be back by then. They'll be back tomorrow, God willing, here in the land of Israel. I just wanted to mention that because I'm so looking forward to their return, and it'll be good to have them back as we all receive Torah this coming Saturday night, Sunday on Shavuot. Once again, the music has crept up on us. Thank you so much for being with me this week. Next week, Rabbi Richman will be back, and a Chag Sameach, happy Shavuot to everyone. Thank you.